A story is true, a story is untrue. As time extends, it matters less and less.
You sure about that? Hello, and welcome to It Is That Deep. My name is Amber, and on this channel, we're going to dig in and explore deep analysis of books, movies, and TV. Today, we're going to be talking about pirates, stories, lies, and critical literacy. The main piece of media I'll be referencing is the 2014 TV show Black Sails. I'll also talk a little bit about the book it's based on, Treasure Island, and spoilers are bound for both. Seriously, all the spoilers for Black Sails. Special to this video, I have a lot to talk about. Given that, I'm posting this 2 different ways. I realize some of you might only have time for one typical length video at a time, so for you, I've split this into 3 parts. They're in a playlist if you want to use that, and I have a link to that over here. But this will allow you to take a break a little easier if you prefer. I also have a link to each of the parts in the description below. But also, some of you might just want to pop this on in the background while you work, clean your house, or do a project without having to worry about finding the next video. And for you, I have this version of the video that goes through the whole topic all in one shot. All right, let's dig into it. Black Sails, my beloved. So obviously, I love lots of different kinds of fiction, which is why I made this channel. And I have a tendency to get passionate about the stuff that I consume. If I see or read something new that really sticks with me, I might make it my personality for a couple of weeks or a month. Black Sails has been my favorite TV show for years, ever since I first binged the whole thing in the space of about 11 days back in 2018. I highly recommend it, with the caveat that it contains lots of violence, swearing, and sex and nudity. It also has a great plot and some really interesting themes and characters to analyze. My point is, while obviously I have a lot of fiction to cover on this channel, and I will, I'll be returning to the Pirates of Nassau from time to time. Black Sails spanned 4 seasons, starting in 2014, and it starred Toby Stephens as James Flint, Luke Arnold as John Silver, Tom Hopper as Billy Bones, Zach McGowan as Charles Vane, Toby Schmitz as Jack Rackham, Clara Paget as Anne Bonny, Luke Roberts as Woods Rogers, Patrick Leister as Benjamin Hornigold, Tyke Murphy as Ned Lowe, Louise Barnes as Miranda Hamilton, Rupert Henry Jones as Thomas Hamilton, Jessica Parker Kennedy as Max, Hannah Liu as Eleanor Guthrie, Mark Ryan as Hal Gates, Hakeem K. Kazim as Mr. Scott, Zethu Pahele as Maddie, and Roland Reed and Janice Iselin each playing Dufresne at different points in the show. I tried really hard to get Zethu Pahele's name correct, but I could only find one interview with her where she says her name, and I listened to it about 50 times, so I'm really sorry if I got it wrong. So the story of Black Sails is built as a prequel to the 1883 book Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, as I mentioned previously. For those unfamiliar, Treasure Island is a children's adventure that follows adolescent Jim Hawkins after he comes into possession of a treasure map previously owned by the captain, a former pirate also known as Billy Bones. Billy Bones had warned him about the one-legged man, referring, not by name, to a pirate named Long John Silver, with whom he had been shipmates under Captain Flint. Jim goes on an adventure to find the island marked on the map, but the crew of the ship taking them there are actually a bunch of pirates, led by Long John Silver, planning to mutiny and take the gold for themselves. Jim does, of course, register that Long John Silver has one leg and considers the possibility that he's the person Billy Bowes described, but upon speaking with him, feels that he is kind and honest and someone he can trust.
The irony wasn't lost on either of us.
That is, until he overhears Long John Silver and the other pirates discussing their plans for mutiny while they're at sea. Black Sails takes place decades before the events of Treasure Island. To go along with certain historical events, the show starts in 1715, which would probably put it about 4 decades or so before the events of Treasure Island. However, the showrunners describe the story as being set 2 decades before. The details are a little loose in places, which I think is intentional. I'll get to that later. The show largely focuses on the story between Long John Silver and Captain Flint, characters introduced in Treasure Island, along with several other characters from the book. This is combined with historical circumstances and historical people, such as Charles Vane, Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Woods Rogers, and others, along with a cast of new characters, including Miranda Hamilton, Max, Eleanor Guthrie, Mr. Scott, Maddie, and other more minor characters. Even though it's a prequel to a children's story, the tone of the show is decidedly different. It's not the swashbuckling light adventure of Treasure Island or something like the Pirates of the Caribbean series, but rather something considerably darker and more violent, and based more in the dark, violent history of piracy in the Bahamas in the 1700s. The story begins the day Captain James Flint meets John Silver, who at this point has 2 legs and no legend about him. Flint attacks the ship Silver is sailing on with the intent to gain information that will allow him to hunt the Spanish treasure galleon Urca de Lima, but Silver steals the information he needs and lies about being a cook to get on the crew. Flint wants the treasure because he plans to bolster their home island of Nassau such that it can be independent from British rule and a fully functioning pirate republic. Flint is also, at the same time, dealing with a man on his crew, Singleton, who wants to hold a vote to elect himself as the new captain instead of Flint. Flint publicly blames the theft of the information on Singleton and kills him to get him out of the way while he figures out the truth about Silver. Silver makes sure Flint can't kill him by memorizing the information and then burning the page it was on. Billy Bones knows about some of Flint's lies surrounding the Urca hunt and worries that Flint is power-hungry and manipulative. During a fight to take guns needed for the hunt from another ship, Billy confronts Flint, but then happens to fall overboard. Flint's quartermaster, Hal Gates, had previously always backed his lies, but thought of Billy as a son, and he suspects that Flint may have had something to do with his fall, and so he conspires with others on the crew to get rid of Flint after they have the treasure. Ultimately, they do sail to hunt the Urca, but it doesn't go as well as they'd hoped. When they get to the expected location, it isn't there, making Flint, Gates, and the crew members that Gates confided in think that Silver led them astray. They run into a Spanish warship instead, and Flint is convinced it was an escort for the Urca and they should fight it so they can find the treasure galleon. But Gates disagrees and insists on running. At the height of their argument, Flint decides to kill Gates. He and Silver then try to force the fight with the warship, but one of the crew members, Dufresne, publicly challenges Flint about his and Silver's lies, and the fight goes very badly for everyone. After everyone abandons ship, they make their way to shore where they discover that the Urca had wrecked from a storm the night before, and all the gold is strewn over the beach. Knowing they can't get the gold off the beach at that time, they decide to leave it behind and instead take over the warship and sail that home to Nassau. On the way there, Flint manages to regain his captaincy, and Silver ingratiates himself with the crew. When they arrive, they want to request help to go back for the gold from Benjamin Hornigold, whose crew holds the power of the Nassau fort, but discover that he has been pushed out of the fort, and it has been taken over by a pirate Flint has had conflict with before, Charles Vane. Hornigold demands help regaining the power of the fort before he helps Flint get the gold. At this point, Billy shows back up, reporting that after he fell overboard, he was captured and tortured by the British Navy, and he stands in support of Flint in fighting back against them and their control of the island. Dufresne disagrees with this, and Billy manages to trick him into revealing himself and others who would be willing to depose the captain, and they are ejected from the crew. At the same time, Vane has had his own troubles. He used to be in a romantic relationship with the woman who runs commerce on the island, Eleanor Guthrie, and a pirate new to the island, Ned Lowe, is threatening her. Vane wants to help, but he can't make his men protect her if he wants to keep their respect and his captaincy, so he finds pretense to move against Lowe in the name of plunder. Ned Lowe took a hostage from a prize, a girl named Abigail Ashe, daughter of the governor of the Carolina colony, Peter Ashe, and Vane convinces his men to kill Lowe and take the girl to ransom her themselves. Over the course of several episodes, we have seen flashbacks of who Flint was before he came to piracy, a Navy lieutenant named James McGraw, who developed a friendship with Thomas and Miranda Hamilton, a married couple in England with the goal of reforming Nassau and fixing the piracy issue. At one point, Flint began a romantic relationship with Miranda, which Thomas knew about, but then it is revealed that he later developed such a relationship with Thomas as well. Thomas wanted to push for pardons for the pirates, but his influential father and many members of Parliament were against it. However, Peter Ashe, before he was governor, was one person who agreed with them and gave them his support. Then word gets around to Thomas's parents about his relationship with Flint, and everything falls apart. Thomas is sent to an asylum where he dies, and Flint and Miranda are required to leave England, which is when they came to Nassau. Miranda, still on the island with Flint, hears that Vane's hostage is Peter's daughter, and makes the argument that instead of forcing Vane from the fort so that Hornigold will help them get the gold, they should take Abigail home to her father in Charleston in exchange for a meeting where they can try again to reform Nassau like they had tried years before. Eleanor makes sure that Flint gets Abigail, and Flint, Miranda, and the crew set off for Carolina. At their meeting with Peter, they almost reach a solution until Miranda recognizes evidence that makes her realize it was Peter who outed them to Thomas's parents all those years ago. The conflict leads to one of Peter's guards killing Miranda, and Flint being arrested, set to be tried and hanged the next day. At the same time, Vane, angry at being tricked out of his hostage, shows up in Carolina as well, ready to kill Flint's men and take the warship for himself as payment. However, when he hears about Flint being arrested, he realizes that Flint's hanging will bolster civilization and weaken piracy, so he decides to rescue him instead. On board the ship, in an altercation with Vane's men and in an attempt to protect the crew, Silver loses his lower left leg. When Flint and Vane get back, the crews are able to make peace with each other and follow their captain's lead in declaring war on civilization. Flint, Vane, and Vane's former quartermaster Jack Rackham, who had managed to take the Urca gold while Flint was gone, work together to rebuild Nassau and rain devastation on settlements that hang pirates. However, England has sent a new governor, Woodes Rogers, to Nassau. He brings with him authority to grant the pirates pardons, which some take. One day on the water, Flint's crew encounters Hornigold, who at this point has taken a pardon and become a pirate hunter. Given limited options, they sail into a storm in an attempt to lose Hornigold, barely pull through, and end up stranded without wind for 3 weeks. Eventually, they manage to get to an uncharted island they find, only to discover that it is inhabited by escaped slaves and maroons. After an initial conflict, they decide to join forces to try to bring freedom to the New World. When they return to Nassau, they are surprised to discover how many pirates have taken part in, so they put forth an ominous threat to get people to come back to Flint's side, and the event ends in a bloody conflict between Silver and Dufresne. After a rescue mission goes wrong, Vane gets captured by Rogers, so while the rest of the pirates are leaving, Billy volunteers to stay behind to sow dissent and rescue Vane. Billy then uses the incident between Silver and Dufresne to craft the legend of Long John Silver to terrorize the island. When Flint and Silver return to the island, Silver takes on the power that Billy has given him, but tension soon rises between Billy and Flint, and Silver comes down on the side of Flint and betrays Billy. In a desperate move, Rogers enlists the help of the Spanish in Cuba to drive the pirates out by telling them to bypass the fort where his people are and burn everything else to the ground. After the Spanish attack, Eleanor, who at this point has married Woodes Rogers, is found dead, and Maddie, the leader of the Maroon Camp and romantic partner to Silver, is missing and presumed dead. As the pirates flee, Jack splits off without a word to go to Philadelphia to try to get help from Eleanor's grandfather in taking control of Nassau and making Rogers pay for some really horrible things he did to Jack and others. Eleanor's grandfather isn't interested in helping, but it turns out her grandmother, Marion Guthrie, is really the one with the power, and she decides to work with him and his group. After being betrayed by Silver, Billy defects to Rogers' side, and he suggests using Maddie, whom Rogers has as a prisoner, as a way to fracture the power of Flint and Silver. Rogers demands a ransom of the remaining money from the Urca, which has been converted into gems and is meant to finance their war, in exchange for Maddie's life. Flint is certain they can get Maddie back without paying the ransom, but Silver doesn't want to risk it and agrees to meet Rogers at Skeleton Island to make the exchange. Flint goes behind Silver's back to bury the treasure on Skeleton Island, and he and Silver do manage to defeat Rogers and rescue Maddie, but the damage to their friendship has been done. After Rogers' defeat, they appear to be getting ready to return to the war effort and go dig up the jewels, but when pressed, Silver admits that he is done with the war and is going to make it all end. He tells the Maroon Camp that Flint gave up on the war and retired, and they manage to make a deal with Marion Guthrie that both ostensibly ends pirates in Nassau and sends Rogers to debtor's prison. Maddie doesn't believe Silver and thinks he must have killed Flint. Silver tells her privately that he didn't kill Flint, but no, Flint didn't exactly retire either. He had previously heard about plantations that acted as humane alternatives to British prisons, where prominent families might send their children that they wanted to disappear. He theorized that it was possible Thomas Hamilton might have been sent there, rather than actually dying in the asylum. What he tells Maddie is that he discovered Thomas was at one of these plantations, and he managed to send Flint there as well, allowing him to step back from the war and separate himself from his pirate identity and return to a place of being James McGraw with Thomas Hamilton. Whether or not he's telling Maddie the truth is debatable. The show wraps up with Jack speaking with an aspiring young pirate in Nassau and explaining the story of Long John Silver, while also discussing the very nature of stories themselves, as we get hints of where the characters go next between then and the start of Treasure Island. There's really so much more to the show than this, including a whole host of female characters I had to gloss over, but this synopsis is already long enough. As I described in the plot overview, there's a lot of double crossing that happens in the show. Everyone lies to each other so much. It might as well be renamed Pretty Little Liars Pirate Edition. So why? Why all the lies? In the show, the characters lie for all sorts of reasons. They lie to get gain in terms of money or power. They lie to manipulate others in helping them towards those ends. They lie to protect themselves. And they lie to protect others. And they lie to themselves that that's what they're doing. In real life, we see parallels to this. We see events in the news or in our own lives about people being scammed out of their money. Politicians and anyone who holds power over others lie to gain and maintain power all the time. Most children have lied to get out of trouble with authority figures, and many people don't grow out of it. And while there are some circumstances in which a lie does truly protect someone, this could bleed over into justification for lies that actually manipulate others, which is something that those in power or those who think they might know better than others might do. A common theme throughout season 1 is Flint telling himself and others that he lies for the benefit of everyone else. A scene in episode 5 has Flint explain his justification to Billy Bones.
We have the chance for a few minutes honesty first.
Honesty?
When Flint's crew goes after the ship they need the guns from, the Andromache, Billy confronts Flint about him regularly lying to the crew and basing their current exploits on the information Silver gave them, which none of them can say for sure is even correct. He asks, "How can you pretend to have no doubts about this?" To which Flint responds, "Years of practice." Flint points out that, yes, he frequently lies to the crew so that they can work together. The Andromache left in the dark and is currently nowhere in sight. He has an idea of where the ship might have gone, which is the course they're following, because that would be the most sensible route for her captain. But he points out that the Andromache's captain knows that Flint knows that, so wouldn't it make sense to take a different route, of which there are several options? There's a good chance that Flint is wrong in his guess, and he knows that. But he tells Billy that the crew knowing that would just make them anxious and unable to do their duties properly at a time when everyone is needed and focus is vital. He uses this to explain that he's protecting the crew with his lies, but Billy doesn't quite buy it. Interestingly, in this exact same episode, Billy does the same thing. He lies to somebody as a way to quell their anxiety. Their accountant, Dufresne, has to be in his first fight when they board the Andromache. He is terrified and is trying to find any reason to either not participate or voice hope that maybe they won't have to fight at all. Billy then tells him a complete lie that on their crew, for some reason, none of their men have died in their first fight, so Dufresne will be perfectly all right. Dufresne does pull through the fight, but it's only in the quiet afterward that he remembers someone who did die his first time. When he brings this up to Billy, Billy says, "Yeah," and then adds several more names to the list, acknowledging that he knew that and more all along, and yes, he did lie about it. Unlike Billy's feelings towards Flint's lies, though, Dufresne thanks him and credits his survival to the lie. Through most of season 1, Flint's quartermaster Gates backs up his lies, using the same justification Flint does. He's protecting the crew, and since a pirate quartermaster's job is to protect the crew from the captain if necessary, it helps him justify to himself that he really is doing his job, even when in reality he's just protecting Flint. He encourages this attitude in Billy, too.
It's not the point. The point is I lied to my own crew to protect the captain.
You lied to protect the crew.
However, Gates is not blind to Flint's true nature.
This is one of those times where we pretend that we both don't know that you're lying.
When Billy tells Gates his concerns about Flint being power hungry and that Flint told him they need a king, it's clear Gates finds this worrying, but he dodges the question when Billy asks him if he agrees with Flint. At the end of the season, Gates finally has it out with Flint about how he has violated his duty as quartermaster more times than he can count on Flint's behalf. And yet, even then, he still tries to protect Flint. Even though Gates opened up to Dufresne and others about Flint and promised to help them hold him to account, he tells Flint that his real plan was to find a way to get Flint to disappear before the crew could do that. Unfortunately, Gates still doesn't make it out of the argument alive. Before leaving for the Urquhart, Flint admits to Gates that he is planning on setting aside a portion of the gold without the knowledge or consent of the rest of the crew to bolster Nassau in his grand plan. The scene in which he discusses this with Gates really encapsulates both his justifications and the reality underlying it all that Gates points out to him.
You're lying to him.
And if I don't, who will? Everyone's lied to, for their own good. Every mother who tells their child that everything will be all right. Every soldier who's told by his commander that courage will see them through. Every subject who's told by
His king. Is that what you are to us now? A sovereign? Levying a tax?
If no one knows, everyone wins.
This is such a common theme with Flint. He thinks he knows better than everyone else, and that he therefore has the right to make decisions on their behalf. His actions to bolster Nassau would be in everyone's best interest, but he thinks so little of the men that he assumes they wouldn't be able to come to that conclusion on their own. Moving past how they justify their lies, how do the characters tell their lies? Occasionally, when characters lie, they create something completely false from whole cloth, and it doesn't always work. The much more common and much more effective method is lies that are made up of just enough truth to sell it. Near the end of season 3, Flint and Silver have a discussion about this type of deception. Silver at this point has taken it upon himself to command violence against one of the men as punishment for actions that put them all at risk. Flint points out that, yes, Silver had his reasons, and they were valid reasons, but the mental voice of that reason was actually the darkness of power and control, simply cloaking itself in reason. He says there was reason to it, as the most compelling lies are comprised almost entirely of truth. Flint acknowledges this effective method of deception, and the fact that he has consciously used it for his own ends, and recommends to Silver that he learn to harness it himself, as he says, so that you may use the darkness rather than it use you. We see Flint employ this type of lie from the very first episode. When Flint finds out that the information he needs for the Urca has been stolen, he's also contending with the threat of losing his captaincy to Singleton. Flint figures out that someone on his crew stole the information, though he's not yet sure who. He had been hiding his goal of seeking the Urca because he didn't trust the crew, but he decides now to use its dramatic reveal to silence Singleton. He takes the truth of the situation to sell a lie that will save himself. So, hunting the Urca? True. Worth millions of dollars in Spanish gold and everyone should be excited? True. Someone stole the necessary information and now everyone should be mad? True. The mutineer just happens to be the one to have done so? Not so much. After Gates' death and the disastrous attempt to take the Urca, Flint loses his captaincy to Dufresne. He is determined to regain his captaincy before they get home, and he manages it through an interesting manipulation of truths. Even though Flint killed Gates, they had been friends for years, and he was truly devastated by his death. Flint approaches Dufresne under the guise of offering advice to a first-time captain, but he opens the conversation by outright telling Dufresne how awful he feels about killing Gates, seemingly showing vulnerability and using Gates' name to explain why he's giving this good advice. It's what Gates would have wanted. He tells Dufresne that they are losing their wind, and that sooner or later someone will suggest they take a different route to be able to use the wind better and get back to Nassau more quickly. He cautions Dufresne against this idea, since doing so would take them through a common route for merchant ships, and the crew will likely push to attack the first ship they see. As they suffered some severe losses and are exhausted from the fight with the warship, Flint asserts that the men aren't ready for a fight. Dufresne is suspicious of Flint's motives in telling him this, as Flint knew he would be. He takes the information to their navigator, and they decide together that Flint likely told him that because if the crew took a prize under Dufresne's leadership, it would solidify his control of the crew. So they decide to do exactly what Flint counseled them not to do. And indeed, just as Flint said, they quickly find a merchant ship and they immediately decide to attack. It doesn't go well. Dufresne flounders in the chaos until Flint steps in and takes control, directing the crew competently in what is truly the best strategy for survival in that moment. After this, he quickly manages to regain control of the crew and is once again made captain. After the vote, Dufresne voices the possibility that Flint orchestrated the whole thing, that no one would have suggested they take that route home if it hadn't been for Flint bringing it up. Flint neither confirms nor denies this, and Dufresne begrudgingly accepts his change in leadership. So, Flint feels bad about Gates' death? True. The best way home is through the shipping lanes? True. The crew isn't ready to take a prize yet? True. Dufresne is incompetent and can't lead the men out of a wet paper bag? Definitely true. The crew would inevitably end up in these circumstances without Flint's interference? Maybe not. Flint isn't the only one who deals in half-truths. After Billy fell overboard, he shows up again in Nassau, reporting that he had been captured and tortured by the British Navy. He privately tells Dufresne that he didn't escape, but was set free on the understanding that if he and up to 9 other men delivered Flint to the Navy, they would all get pardons. Dufresne is still in a mutinous state of mind, and when Billy asks if Dufresne knows of 8 other men who think similarly, Dufresne says yes. Billy tells him to gather them and meet him at a specific location later. When they meet, Billy shows up with others from the crew to witness Dufresne's betrayal, and he tells them his actual motives. The Navy did offer him and 9 other men pardons, but after what they did to him, Billy will fight to the death to make sure that no other pirate, not even Flint, has to go through the same thing. His goal was to bait Dufresne and anyone who felt similarly into outing themselves, and then expel them from the crew in front of witnesses. So, pardons offered? True. The Navy wants Flint captured? True. Billy wants the same thing will help others get it? No. When Vane wants to help Eleanor with the threat of Ned Lowe, he can't tell his men directly that's what he wants to do. He seeks out information from the owner of the town brothel, Max, knowing that she will be able to get the necessary information from one of Lowe's men. When he gets the news back about Lowe's hostage, Abigail, Vane uses this fact to convince his crew to attack Lowe and take her for themselves, and just so happens to protect Eleanor at the same time. Lowe has a hostage worth lots of money? True. Vane's crew would greatly benefit from stealing her for themselves? True. This motivation is strictly business? False. When Flint gets Abigail from Vane and they sail to Carolina, she keeps a journal, which we hear largely in voiceover, observing the pirates and contrasting it with the one-sided tales she had heard about them from her father. Certainly, she had had horrible experiences with Lowe, and then slightly less horrible but still not great experiences with Vane. But with Flint, she's able to witness the pirates as being simply men. Complicated and not without fault, but still human, unlike what she had been raised to believe about them. She writes, "From across an ocean, it is hard to know what the New World is. All I knew were the stories I was told of monsters and valiant men sworn to slay them. But now that I have merely traversed the ocean that separates New World from Old, I fear that the stories I have heard may have clouded the truth more than clarified it. It would seem these monsters are men, sons, brothers, fathers, and it would seem these men fear their own monsters, an empire, a navy, the king, my father. So much I have left behind me, London, my youth and comfortable stories. So much lies ahead in Charleston, a future and harder truths. I fear the stories I have heard may have clouded the truth more than clarified it. As so many of these stories were relayed to me by my father, I am forced to wonder if he is simply mistaken, or if his motives are something more deliberate than that." Over the course of the series, we see a broad range of actions and motives from the pirates, showing them as the complicated people they were, but the citizens of civilization have their own issues as well. At the end of the series, both of these liars, the pirates and civilization, combine into one moment in a conversation between Flint and Silver. When Flint and Silver have their final confrontation over the war, Flint makes the argument about the lies and half-truths of civilization, and Silver responds by pointing out Flint's lies and half-truths about why he wants the war in the first place.
This is how they survive. You must know this. You're too smart not to know this.
They paint the world full of shadows and then tell their children to stay close to the light. Their light. Their reasons, their judgments. Because in the darkness, there be dragons. But it isn't true. We can prove that it isn't true. In the dark, there is discovery. There is possibility. There is freedom. In the dark, once someone has illuminated it, and who has been so close to doing it as we are right now? This isn't about England, or her king, or our freedom, or any of it. When I thought Marty was gone, for the first time, I saw the world through your eyes. A world in which there is nothing left to lose. I felt the need to make sense of the loss. To impart meaning to it. Whatever the cost. To exalt her memory with battles and victories. But beneath all of that, I recognized the other thing. Hiding in the spaces. It was rage. And it just wanted to see the world burn.
For all Flint's grand speeches about freedom, it wasn't about any of that, and Flint wasn't being fully honest about it to anyone, perhaps including himself. So, lies, lies, and more lies throughout the whole show, many of which are wholeheartedly believed and end up changing the course of the story. Why on earth do people believe them? First, there's oratory power. Flint and Silver are most noted as being able to harness the power of story in speeches, with multiple characters commenting on this ability. Talking to Eleanor about Flint, Vane says the following.
Were it anyone else in the world, you would see right through this. But that man starts talking, and you will believe anything.
A discussion about Silver's power happens while the crew is on their way to Carolina to return Abigail. As they get close, Silver speaks to the crew to prepare them for what they are about to face. He tells a story about a time he, allegedly, once sailed there with a merchant crew and the awe-inspiring experience of it. At the same time, Billy and another character, Mr. Scott, discuss his storytelling.
When Captain Flint first arrived on this island, he gained influence faster than any man I'd seen before, or since. I heard men say it was because of the violence. I heard them say it was his charm. But it was clear to me the reason why he was so good at bending men towards his will was he knew the power of a story and how to harness it to his own ends. And that man there, I would argue, may very well be his equal.
You know it isn't even his.
What do you mean?
The pirate story is Bernard's. Heard him tell it before. That bit about the first mate of her before too. Jeffries, I think. Can't remember. Can't trust a f***ing thing out of his mouth.
Yeah, the story's his, the story isn't his. But the power of the telling, that is clearly his.
We see an example of this in the first episode, again in Singleton's death. Before the deadly fight begins, Flint reveals to the crew that they are going to hunt the Urca Deliva, but he stretches it out. He brings out some of the information, that it's going to be a prize of almost unimaginable value, and that they are close to being able to hunt it, and then accuses Singleton of taking that all away from them. If this weren't enough, he then kills him and follows it up with the full reveal of the Urca. He does this absolutely covered in Singleton's blood, as well as a fair amount of his own, and builds his speech past the simple tale of the Urca, and further declares that he's not just going to make them rich or strong, but that they will be the princes of the new world. It's a dramatic reveal made all the stronger and more dramatic by its presentation, and by his oratory skill to build up his speech and build up the men into an excited frenzy over the gold, to the point that most of them forget about the mutiny that previously more than half of them were willing to go for. As the show continues, we see that when Silver and Flint agree on their goal, their combined power seems unstoppable. But there are times when they clash over this ability they share. When Flint's crew runs into Hornigold on the water, just before they go into the storm, Hornigold offers them all pardons, though it's perhaps insincere. They are outgunned and outmaneuvered and seem to be out of options. But through his power of speech, Flint convinces them all to sail directly into a horrible storm that may destroy the ship and kill them all. Yet he manages to convince them, including Silver for a time. It's not until they are through the storm and facing an inability to sail that Silver comes to his senses and angrily tells Billy they should have just taken the pardons and then gone right back to being pirates. But he acknowledges that Flint managed to convince all the men, including him, and in so doing managed to create the reality he wanted, one where they all did something as foolish as sailing into a storm like that. He worries that with Flint in as dark a state of mind as he is after the events of Charleston, the reality he and his speeches conjure will be the death of them all. Another way lies get sold is through exaggeration and rumor. After Silver loses his leg, he is initially very aware of his limitations, to the point that he scoffs at a rumor about his fearsomeness in raids that he's never fought in. Flint is one of the pirates who leads their raids against the Bahama settlements after Miranda's death in Charleston, but things are getting more dangerous, and Silver wants him to stop going into the raids himself, for fear that he could get killed and their entire endeavor goes up in smoke. Flint refuses to listen, insisting that if they're going to tell a story of him terrorizing settlements, he needs to be the one telling it.
That story is telling itself, and you know it. We've been assigned responsibility for raids we were nowhere near. Jesus, I've been given credit for having been a part of some of them. They are so terrified of you, they're terrified of me.
Flint is frightening, but rumor and exaggeration about his whole crew, including his disabled quartermaster, has made that fear that much more effective. Not long after this, Long John Silver is born after he uses his new prosthetic leg to show that he is someone to be feared. After Flint's crew is seemingly lost in the storm, everyone in Nassau assumes they are dead, and many pirates sign pardons and become legitimate British citizens again, relinquishing control of the island. Late one night, Silver comes into the tavern to announce Flint's return and threaten those who went back on their promises to Flint to defend the island and instead signed pardons, saying that if they return to Flint's side, all will be forgiven, but if they don't, he will remember the names of those who abandoned them and they will seek vengeance on them. He's about to leave when Dufresne stands up and tells him and the entire tavern that Silver's full of crap, Flint is dead, and Silver isn't worth half the attention people have ever given him. This does not end well for Dufresne. Silver proceeds to kill him with his fake leg in front of the entire tavern, takes a list of those who signed pardons, and tells the tavern,
My name is John Silver, and I've got a long memory.
When Flint, Silver, and others leave, and Billy stays behind to incite unrest among those still on the island, he creates the legend of Long John Silver as an ongoing threat to the island and any who betray their cause. While Billy and his small group work together, they discuss the best way to use the incident between Silver and Dufresne. One man suggests they start a rumor that people call him John the Giant, and he's 7 feet tall, and not only isn't slowed by his false leg, but he's even better on it than most men are on their natural feet. When it's pointed out how ridiculous that sounds, he responds that the event in the tavern is an incredible enough story that it stands a good chance of being embellished regardless. Billy agrees, though he wants to keep thinking about names besides John the Giant, eventually arriving at a reference to Silver's long memory. Billy then uses the figure of Long John Silver and the myth of the doom-heralding black spot to terrorize the island, implying that Silver has eyes everywhere and will bring destruction on anyone who defies him, raising this myth to near omnipotent levels. Terror through rumor is one way to get people to believe lies, essentially through force, but sometimes people are willing to buy into a lie if it brings them comfort. I previously mentioned how in the fight for the Andromache early in the series, Billy lies to Dufresne about how no one in their crew dies their first fight. He gives no explanation for it, even saying, "Don't ask me why, it just is." Dufresne pushes back a tiny bit, expressing disbelief since men die all the time. Billy insists that those in their first fight never do, and therefore Dufresne will be just fine. Dufresne is still terrified, but he buys into Billy's lie and gets the confidence he needs to survive the fight. Why would he believe something so unlikely with no real explanation? Because in that moment, the comfort that he would get through it was what he needed, and Billy was willing to give it to him. When Flint and the crew arrive at the uncharted island after the storm, the Maroons living there capture them, and if they can't find a way out, they will almost certainly all die. As they sit in their cages, Billy is busy theorizing ways to escape by force, while Silver is talking to Flint about using diplomacy, and Flint is just ready to give up.
We'll all face certain death with our own kind of lie. Billy's is that he can fight his way out of it. Yours is that you can talk your way past it. But for me, I don't know that I have any more lies left in me.
Later, Flint agrees to risk his life to get them out of there, which Billy is fully in support of, while Silver is a little more hesitant.
Now, the strange thing is, I should be with Billy. Until most recently, I'm quite certain I would have been. Unbothered by the idea of trading your life for the rest of the crew's. And for some reason, right now I am bothered by it. But I understand it. I understand the allure of ensuring that no one will ever think you the villain you fear you are.
Silver correctly understands about Flint that, despite the things he's done that arguably do make him a villain, he fears that anyone would think of him that way, and sacrificing himself in this way while he is in despair might help make up for that image. And yeah, Flint has done villainous things, along with just about everybody in the show. These characters are complicated in their motivations and actions, and are all too often faced with what feel like impossible decisions. As Jack Rackham puts it to Woodes Rogers,
We're all villains in Nassau. Don't think because you're new you're any different.
But Flint seeks comfort in the possibility that maybe he's not, or that at least he can fix things and balance the scales in the end, even while asserting that Billy's and Silver's ideas for escape are simply their own ways of seeking comfort in the face of death. Lies are also sold simply by being spoken with a trusted voice of authority. This is related to the first point about oratory skill, but it comes after the authority derived from that, or from rumor or comfort or whichever, develops and grants power to the speaker. After Billy masterfully creates the legend of Long John Silver, Silver himself arrives back on Nassau and takes on the power and authority the legend gives him. But Billy starts causing trouble for him and Flint and the entire war effort, to which Silver responds by setting Billy up to die. A pirate who worked with Billy for some time tells Silver that he feels he should be the one to kill Billy, but ultimately betrays Silver by instead telling Billy what is going on and refusing to kill him. In telling Billy the truth, he says that Silver convinced the men to betray him by telling them that Billy had withheld vital information from the group, causing disaster.
And they all believed him.
But I don't think anyone actually believed it. You weren't indicted based on the facts, or our suspicions of your motives. He just said it.
Instead of killing Billy, Silver alters his plans at the last moment and decides a better option would be to allow the men Billy actually did harm with his actions to exact their vengeance on him. Afterwards, Silver talks to Billy and explains his reasons for why he did what he did, and at the same time points out just how much power he now has.
Billy, I could walk out there and tell them the sky is red, and they believe me. That's the power you've given me.
Silver has the ultimate authority. The men accept his word, no matter how clearly untrue, without resistance, and he can create whatever narrative he wants. So we've seen how lies get sold in the moment, but there's also something to be said for the way lies and all kinds of stories create history. In the show, different pirates have different perspectives on the idea of legacy. Hornigold and Gates, both older pirates, have something of a pessimistic view of it. Early in the series, the two have a conversation that turns to discussion of pirates who have left piracy and rejoined civilization. Hornigold says that his men, and pirates in general, seem to be losing faith in what they're doing. He had promised his men they would be part of a campaign to return a rightful king to the throne, inspiring them with a righteous goal. But he believes they, and pirates in general, are, as he says, coming to terms with a very uncomfortable truth.
But no matter how many lies we tell ourselves, or no matter how many stories we convince ourselves we're part of, we're all just thieves awaiting a noose.
We hear Gates' perspective on this near the end of Season 1. On the way to the Urca, Flint and Gates have a long conversation in Flint's cabin, largely reminiscing about old shipmates and amusing stories. The conversation turns serious when Gates tells about a friend, Mr. Craig, who died while taking a prize, and when Gates looked at his possessions after the loss, he found a letter meant for Mr. Craig's sister. Gates looked for the sister in New York for 2 weeks to deliver the letter and can never find her. So after they put out to sea, he waited until they were in open water with no land in sight and dropped the letter over the side. As he says, return to the sea.
There are no legacies in this life, are there? No monuments, no history. Just the water. It pays us, and then it claims us. Swallows us whole. As if we'd never been here at all.
This theme continues into the end and into the real world in the sense that we know a little about some pirates, but they generally aren't exactly revered as heroes with monuments, and what we do have becomes distorted and simplified to fantastical stories, with little regard to the actual people. On the other hand, we have Jack Rackham. Jack is all about legacy and art. Seeing his personal legacy is a huge part of his character. He expresses multiple times over the importance of art and its impact on history. When he first becomes captain, he spends a lot of time trying his hardest to get the perfect flag design, emphasizing the importance of the artistry and the effect it has on both the sailors hopefully surrendering to it and on history itself. He tells another captain of the importance of giving a rousing speech to the men as they prepare for battle, saying that we are emotional beings after all, and rhetoric is the fuel that feeds the fire. He gets the final monologue of the series as he tells Long John Silver's story to the aspiring pirate speaking with him in the tavern and talks about stories in general. In the last scene of the last episode, it's revealed that he has finally settled on his flag for the crew. His partner, Anne Bonny, asks why they had to change it again, and Jack responds by, again, speaking poetically about the importance of the art.
Because what's it all for if it goes unremembered? And it's the art that leaves the mark. But to leave it, it must transcend. It must speak for itself. It must be true.
When the crew members hold up the flag for his approval, he seems mildly disappointed, but declares it fine and moves on. The final shot of the show is then the reveal of the skull and crossroads design, the most recognizable pirate flag in the modern day. He spends so much of the show obsessed with his legacy. What we'll say of him, Jack Rackham was here. In truth, the only thing we really have named for him is Rackham's Key, because that's where his head was gibbeted after he was hanged, and it became known by that name colloquially. But when the flag is revealed, the flag that so many people think of when they think of pirates, he doesn't see that his legacy, his immortality, is staring him in the face, and he merely says, "It's fine." In the final monologue of the show, Jack says, "The stories we want to believe, those are the ones that survive. Those are the stories that shape history." In Flint's last speech, we have the following.
All this will be for nothing. We will have been for nothing. Defined by their histories, distorted to fit into their narrative. Until all that is left of us are the monsters in the stories they tell their children.
Both of these quotes open the story up to our world. In Jack's quote, we have a reference to the way stories of historical pirates as we have them may be somewhat fluid in their truth. In Flint's quote, we have the setup for the very existence of Treasure Island as a book, in which Silver and Flint are literally just monsters in a story told to children. In either case, there's an implication of distortion and questionable authenticity to the stories. First, we have Treasure Island. Black Sails is obviously explicitly intended as a prequel to Treasure Island. Certain details are kept as they work backward from the old story to this modern day created show. Things like how Flint was captain of a ship named the Walrus. Silver was his quartermaster. Silver as a character is treacherous and easily switches sides if it means seeking his own ends. And Billy Bones knows the intention of the Black Spot, to the point that he dies of a stress and alcohol-related stroke after receiving it. Certain things were changed, however. For example, the Black Spot comes directly from Robert Louis Stevenson. In the show, they say it was created by the real pirate Henry Avery, which is not true, but was rather just a way to fit the fictional concept into history. In the book, Billy receives the map to the treasure from Flint himself, implying a certain amount of trust and camaraderie between the two of them. In the show, they don't explain or predict how exactly Billy gets the map in the time period between the show and the book, but given where things leave off, it's unlikely in that version for it to have been given freely from Flint to Billy. Silver claims in the book that he was the only man Flint ever feared, which isn't really demonstrated in the show, but it's something that could easily still be in line with it anyway, given Silver's power of lies and distortion. As for actual history, a major reference that may be a distortion itself is a general history of the pirates. A lot of the history, or rather tropes, we have of pirates comes from a general history of the pirates, but it's considered something of an unreliable source. It was presented as nonfiction, but at minimum embellished a lot of the stories, and in some cases may have made things up completely. The people at the time, and now, given that we are talking about a pirate show from the modern day, were fascinated by pirates, and the author, under the pseudonym Captain Charles Johnson, was willing to take their money. There are, of course, many records of trials, witness accounts, etc., but they are not as popularized as a general history of the pirates and the tropes it inspired. Part of the issue, of course, is that as criminals, the pirates weren't exactly looking to be on official records, so a lot of what we have is simply things like the trial records, when they did end up on official documents against their will. But what we have from a general history of the pirates needs to be taken with a big grain of salt. In some cases, it may be about as factual as Black Sails itself is, containing some historical truth with a whole lot of fan fiction mixed in. There's a scene within the show where we see something of a reflection of this, both the attitude of the people in civilization and the literature created to feed that attitude. When Jack goes to Philadelphia to seek help for Nassau, he is approached by a girl, probably in her young teens, who guesses that he might be a pirate. She seems initially to genuinely be seeking information, asking Jack to tell her everything about being a pirate of Nassau. She asks if he knew the giants like Charles Vane and Jack Rackham, not realizing who she's talking to. Jack is initially pleased by this, especially when she tells him about a fantastic story she heard about him outsmarting Flint. He starts to agree with her, saying that the story she heard of him stealing the Urca gold before Flint could is actually true. But then she starts telling stories she heard about Vane, whom Jack was very close with. He can't get very far into speaking of his brave, loyal, and true nature before she starts talking excitedly about the oversimplifications and outright lies she's heard about him. She brings up how he killed Ned Lowe, but with limited perspective on the reasons for it. She then says that she heard that he would butcher his enemies for amusement and make them into stew. He was truly an animal, she says. This is upsetting for Jack, and he expresses disbelief that she would buy into something that, from his perspective, is so obviously false. She simply responds that she read it in a newspaper. He then gets called into the meeting he was waiting for, but before leaving he tells her that the truth is that Charles Vane was a good man and a dear friend, and that she should put down the newspapers and read a book. As the girl turns away, she mutters about how the truth isn't nearly as interesting. A General History of the Pirates was a book rather than a newspaper, of course, but it played on the attitude similar to the girl who approaches Jack in the show. People in London, where the book was published, were fascinated with the current events of the pirates that existed so far away, and the more fantastical the stories, the more the pirates were othered into being truly animals, the more interesting the people found it. As a side note, this othering is also a way to make people more comfortable with the harm and death of people they consider different from themselves, which is a whole other topic that could be dug into, but not today. Because of this, the tropes and myths of a general history of the pirates persist even today, and some were included as inspiration for the show. So here's what we actually know. In the 1700s, NASA did for a time become something of a pirate republic, led by the Flying Gang, established by Benjamin Hornigold and Henry Jennings. Hornigold and Jennings were rivals who nonetheless worked together to create the Republic of Pirates. A major part of the establishment of the Republic of Pirates came from the 1715 treasure fleet, of which the real Urca de Lima was a part, and which did wreck off the coast of Florida thanks to a hurricane it was caught up in. After its wreck, Charles Vane and Henry Jennings captured a Spanish mail ship and got the location of the wreckage and attacked, stealing 87,500 British pounds worth of gold and silver. The Republic did come to an end when King George appointed Woodes Rogers as governor and offered a universal pardon to the pirates, which many accepted. Other pirates, including Charles Vane, fought back against the pardons and generally caused a lot of trouble for those trying to re-establish English rule. In addition to the pardons, infighting within the Flying Gang, such as when Hornigold took the pardon and became a pirate hunter, led to the downfall of the control they held over Nassau. Many characters in Black Sails were based on real people from history, such as Benjamin Hornigold, Charles Vane, Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Mary Read, who has a very minor role in the show, Ned Lowe, and Woodes Rogers. There are others as well, but since they didn't come up in this discussion of lies, I'll leave discussion of them for another time. As mentioned previously, Hornigold was one of the founders of the Republic of Pirates in Nassau. After the royal pardon went out, he accepted it and worked for Governor Rogers to track down and arrest pirates who hadn't accepted the pardon. In a general history of the pirates, it says he got caught in a hurricane and crashed on an uncharted reef, though the details are debated by historians. For Charles Vane, the salvage of the 1715 treasure fleet was one of his first ventures as a pirate, during which he was under the command of Henry Jennings. Court documents note that he was known for his cruelty, beating and torturing sailors he captured to gain information on their valuables. When King George offered a pardon to the pirates, Vane led pirates opposed to taking the pardon. He did eventually end up taking one, but returned to piracy less than a month later. He was trapped in Nassau when Woodes Rogers arrived in 1718, and he set a ship on fire and sailed it towards Rogers' fleet to be able to escape, which is dramatized in the show. It just damaged one ship, but the others pulled away to avoid it, and he got out that way. After he was left stranded after being caught in a hurricane, he was found by an English crew, which he tried to join under a false name, but was recognized and captured. He was found guilty of piracy and hanged in Port Royal on March 29, 1721. As for Captain Rackham, some people know him as Calico Jack, but that is a nickname that originated from a general history of the pirates and likely wasn't actually used for him. Court documents often made note of pirate nicknames, and he was referred to simply as John Rackham there. A general history of the pirates says that he was quartermaster to Charles Vane and led the boat that had him removed as captain. In Vane's trial transcript, it was reported that he was deposed, but it doesn't name the person responsible. Rackham was known for having sailed with two female pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. In popular culture, the Cross Swords Jolly Roger flag, which I mentioned before as revealed at the end of the show, is attributed to Rackham, but in reality, it only dates back to a book, Mordbuch des Satans Geschichte der Freibeuterei, that came out in 1959. He was executed in Port Royal November 18, 1720. His head was gibbeted on a small key that later became colloquially known as Rackham's Key. Anne Bonny did sail with Captain Rackham, though their actual relationship is unknown. A general history of the pirates states that they were romantic, but nothing in trial transcripts state this. Similarly, another book of questionable reliability stated that she and Mary Read were romantically involved, but their trial transcripts don't talk about their personal lives. She was captured along with Rackham's crew in 1720 and was convicted of piracy as well, but she and Mary Read both claimed to be pregnant to get a stay of execution. According to A General History of the Pirates, Mary Read was disguised as a boy from a young age because she was an illegitimate child, and her older brother by about a year had died in infancy. Her mother raised her as a boy, pretending she was her brother to cover her illegitimacy and to get financial support from her mother-in-law, as her husband had been lost at sea. It's entirely likely that, at least as a pirate, she was known to be a woman, which is why I am referring to her as such. From what we have, she was more likely to have been a cis woman than a trans man. But it's also entirely possible that her disguising herself as a man is just something the author of A General History of the Pirates made up. She died in prison after the trial of John Rackham's crew. Ned Lowe, also referred to as Edward Lowe with an E at the end, was known for being incredibly violent, over the top, and sadistic in his torture. Charles Vane, as mentioned previously, would do things like beat sailors to get information out of them, which is obviously still not great. Ned Lowe would hurt people in horrific ways just because. I'm not going to go into the things he did. If you want to find out, feel free to look him up. There are varied accounts of his end, but he was around until at least late 1723. Shifting away from the pirates, we have Woodes Rogers. We have a whole lot more verified information on him than the others due to him not being a criminal and avoiding the official record the way the pirates did. He was a privateer who spent 3 years sailing the world and capturing Spanish ships for England during the War of Spanish Succession. He wrote a book about his experiences, which launched him to fame, especially the part where he rescued a man who had been left alone on an island for 4 years, which was the inspiration for the book Robinson Crusoe. He was governor of Nassau twice, and the first time did end with him in prison for debt, which is where the show leaves off. But he later came back and was made governor again. After being made governor the first time, he was faced with 2 major problems less than a month in. Vane wrote to say he and Blackbeard were going to take the island back by force, and the Spanish were threatening to drive the British out of the Bahamas. Also, disease swept through his people, killing nearly 100 of them, while the locals stayed healthy. On September 14, 1718, he received information that Vane was on another island in the Bahamas, and Rogers sent Hornigold and John Cockram, another former pirate turned pirate hunter, to gather intelligence and possibly fight Vane. When they were gone for quite a while, he declared martial law over Nassau. After Hornigold and Cockram returned, they were sent to hunt other pirates. When they returned with several men to be tried for piracy, Rogers hanged 8 of them in early December, which intimidated the rest of the people there to the point that when some in Nassau conspired to overthrow Rogers and return to pirate rule at the end of December, they didn't have much of any support. Spain raided Nassau late February of 1720. Several of these events were dramatized or slightly altered for the show. Even after Britain and Spain were no longer at war, Rogers was in massive debt due to the funds it required to fix fortifications in Nassau, and despite his hopes, he was not reimbursed by Britain or his investors. He sailed back to Britain hoping to get information as to why this was, and when he arrived, he was informed that there was a new governor and he was taken to debtor's prison. His creditors later took pity on him and he was released. Whoever it was who actually wrote a general history of the pirates got a lot of information from Rogers, which then launched Rogers back into fame in a similar way as the book he had written previously. He was then able to petition for release from his debts and was made governor a second time. For one more pirate, Henry Jennings. Jennings is barely referenced in passing a few times in Black Sails, but looking at his history, it seems that the writers took a lot of it and put it into the fictional history of Captain Flint. He was one of the major founders of the Pirate Republic with Hornigold, and he and Charles Vane captured a Spanish mail ship that gave them the precise location of the salvage camp for the 1715 treasure fleet, leading to the ambush and capture of the silver and gold. He was a well-educated privateer, initially under the direction of Lord Archibald Hamilton, before becoming a pirate. In 1718, he took the pardon and retired, though there are different theories that he was either captured by Spaniards and died in a Spanish prison, or he grew old with his family as a plantation owner in Bermuda. So Black Sails either got things wrong or just changed a fair bit about these people and events. There is something to be said for taking artistic liberties in a work of fiction to make the story more interesting, dramatic, or entertaining. The series alters some historical events, combines others, and pulls from less than reliable sources like a general history of the pirates and others. Information from a general history of the pirates would include things like the relationship between Jack Rackham and Anne Bonny, and the idea of Mary Read sometimes disguising herself as a man and going by Mark Read, as we see at the very end of the series. She's the aspiring pirate that Jack is talking to. In the show, when they show the true event of Charles Vane needing to escape Nassau and lighting a ship on fire to do so, they fictionalize it by altering some of the people involved and the context. Vane was actually tried and hanged in Port Royal, not at Nassau, and under very different circumstances. As I mentioned, the cross towards Jolly Roger almost certainly was not connected to Captain Rackham, but they took what many today think of as a historical fact and worked it into the story, perhaps largely as an expression of a major theme, both of his character and of the series at large. For all his statements about art and history and his efforts to make it for himself, you really can't see history and what effects the small things will have from the vantage point of the past. So why get it so wrong? So-called mistakes, as egregious as these, especially things so clearly documented as deaths, in something that I'd say is otherwise pretty well written, strikes me as intentional, and it does go along with the theme I've covered here. It largely raises the question, what if we were wrong? What if Captain Flint and Long John Silver had been real people, but after the downfall of their war, they were distorted and erased from the record until they were just characters in a children's book? What if the records we do have had inaccuracies or one-sided stories along the lines of what Abigail Ashe writes in her journal about her new understanding of pirates? There's an old adage, often misattributed to Churchill, but appears to be older than that history is written by the victors. It's not quite so clear-cut and simplified as that, as historians do a lot of work to uncover what they can from all sides of conflicts, and we're always learning more. For example, there were situations in ancient Egypt where newer pharaohs would deface monuments and records of older pharaohs whose history they wanted erased. But the only reason we know about those situations is because the newer pharaohs were not fully successful, and dedicated historians found the information. And I don't mean to single out Egypt as the only ones to have done this either. There have certainly been others, but I will admit that I myself am not a historian. But I think it does open the question about whether there were historical circumstances where those in power tried to erase the past and were successful, at least until historians find new information. Additionally, there's a difference between what historians have uncovered through years of research and what trickles down to public school history classes, and from there what becomes common knowledge, wherein many who we do have information on are still erased from the general public's understanding of history. So, while the show and Treasure Island are obviously works of fiction, it does ask the question about how much we really do know of the truth as it humanizes and fills in blanks and alters some of the history around these historical figures. So now we arrive at the question posed at the very start. Does it matter? Several times in the series, sometimes through passing comments, sometimes through grand statements, we get the assertion that the truth behind the stories doesn't actually matter. In the first episode, Gates is trying to buy votes from the crew members to support Flint amid the ongoing power struggle, and in a conversation with one of them, he claims that voting for Flint and encouraging all of this man's group of men to vote for him will be good for their futures. He is then directly asked if he really cares about the men's futures or if it's really just about Flint's future. Gates shrugs it off with a smile and says, "What difference does it make?" When Eleanor promises to get Abigail from Vane to Flint, she initially states that Vane agreed to do so, and Flint correctly guesses that that's not true.
He agreed, he didn't agree. What difference does it make? I am guaranteeing that the exchange you offered will be honored. Do you understand?
Eleanor makes a claim on behalf of Vane while also acknowledging that the offer and assurance of the offer really come from her, and she doesn't particularly care about the truth or his feelings on the matter in this circumstance. In the very next episode, we see Billy and Flint discuss the night that he was seemingly lost at sea and the open question as to whether it was actually an accident or if Flint took advantage of an opportunity to shut down any potential dissent coming from Billy. Billy tells Flint that in his memory, he lost his footing and grabbed Flint's hand, which moments later he felt slipping away. He acknowledges that it's just as likely either way that Flint truly tried to save him or that he intentionally dropped him. When Flint asks him which he thinks it was, Billy responds, "Doesn't much matter as far as I can tell. I'll likely never know for certain. It's possible you'll never even know for certain." He continues that what is facing them, the British Navy and the danger it and all of civilization poses, is the bigger issue at hand that makes Flint's actions not matter. When Billy creates the Long John Silver legend, several characters debate about how best to embellish it, or whether to embellish it at all. After a suggestion that it deserves to be embellished, one of the women aiding the pirates, Adele, asks, "Do we care that it isn't remotely true?" And Billy states that it doesn't matter what's true, not now at any rate. In the series finale, when Jack speaks with Eleanor's grandmother, he says that he can tell her whatever she wants to hear about Flint's end, but the truth of it matters not at all, because the bigger issue in front of them, the end of the war, is the truth that matters. The ongoing theme for these quotes seems to be that in the face of bigger issues, concerns over the veracity of smaller issues don't matter so much. In some cases, that could be true. As I mentioned previously, there are times that lying does protect someone, say, lying to protect someone's identity or whereabouts from someone who wants to hurt them. In that case, whether or not what you say is true doesn't matter in the face of the bigger issue of protecting somebody. But always citing a bigger picture for why honesty doesn't matter can become a rationalization, as we saw with the way Flint would simply tell himself and others that his lies protected people, when in the end they were selfish means to an end for him. I think in the average situation in our lives, honesty, even when it might make things a little bit more difficult, is a virtue to aspire to. At the end, Jack gives this monologue often cited by the fans of the show.
A story is true, a story is untrue. As time extends, it matters less and less. The stories we want to believe, those are the ones that survive, despite upheaval and transition and progress. Those are the stories that shape history. And then, what does it matter if it was true when it was born? It's found truth in its maturity, which, if a virtue in man, ought to be no less so for the things men create.
Jack seems to be making a statement here about how our willingness to go along with stories, regardless of the veracity, is what makes the story survive, have meaning, and become canonical truth to the average person. As I said before, there's sometimes a gap between what historians know and what the average person believes to be true. Prior to research for this video, I was under the impression that the Crossroads Jolly Roger was the flag of Calico Jack Rackham, when in reality, neither the flag nor the nickname are supported by the historical record. And obviously, historians who have researched this time and place know that, but I don't think it's very common knowledge. It's also possible that it is, and I just live under a rock. Who knows? Come yell at me in the comments. But this idea of the flag was pervasive enough that it made for a good theme within the show. Jack seems to be saying that the truth found in these stories outweighs the truth in their origins. If we're talking about fiction and the type of truth we can gain from that, absolutely, I completely agree. The speech he gives just before the reveal of his flag about how art must be true is similar to what I've said in a previous video, here, about the way art speaks to us. But if we're talking about history and education or current events and how they impact us now, then I believe truth and adherence to facts do matter. Which brings things into the present and the way we apply these lessons. In terms of fiction, the French Algerian philosopher, journalist, and author Albert Camus said, "Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth." I've also referenced the book Story by Robert McKee before, and in critiquing the type of screenwriter who writes their characters doing mundane things that have no point in furthering either the plot or our understanding of character, he writes, "This writer believes that the more precise his observation of day-to-day facts, the more accurate his reportage of what actually happens, the more truth he tells. But fact, no matter how minutely observed, is truth with a small t. Big T truth is located behind, beyond, inside, below the surface of things, holding reality together or tearing it apart, and cannot be directly observed. Because this writer sees only what is visible and factual, he's blind to the truth of life." We find the truth of life and our understanding of it through the themes we see and understand in a story. A story doesn't have to have literally happened to gain meaning from it. And sometimes the meaning is better understood through fiction, as it allows the writer the ability to focus on the specific truth they want to tell without all the confusing, contradicting aspects of reality that cloud meaning. In the story of Black Sails, as long as we accept it as fiction, it doesn't really matter that the Crossroads Jolly Roger didn't actually belong to anyone named Jack Rackham. Not when it tells us a truth about legacy and the nature of history and art and story. This differs from things like the way we teach and understand history, as well as the way we report and understand current events. When false stories gain traction in the societal concept of history or current events, those who choose to believe them when they have knowledge showing otherwise are complicit as it gains further traction. It's the difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is what happens if you see something untrue labeled as fact and don't scrutinize it and pass it along without stopping to ask if it's true. It becomes really easy to fall into this trap when emotions are running high. These days, it's most commonly outrage that spreads this stuff. But there's also righteous indignation, often fed by confirmation bias, or schadenfreude, because when someone awful supposedly gets poetic comeuppance, it can be easy to believe and then fun to share. Or maybe something sweet or sad or beautiful that aligns with our worldview perfectly. There's lots of reasons that tend to come down to what we want to believe. And that's true even of outrage. No, most of us don't want to believe horrible people are doing horrible things. But when we see that maybe they did, it clicks on our brains with a certain sense of, oh, of course they would do something like that. And we share with all of our friends saying, see, look how horrible these people are. I can't believe it. While still absolutely believing it enough to share it without fact checking. Disinformation, on the other hand, is the source of misinformation. For every misleading meme that sparks our outrage or our schadenfreude or brings us to smugly say, I told you so, or tugs at our heartstrings, someone had to make that meme or write that article or start that rumor. And maybe the creator of that specific meme or article got bad information, but somewhere along the line, someone started the bad information. At best, there was a misunderstanding that no one cleared up or bothered to check before leaping to conclusions and telling everyone they know. But all too often, someone intentionally lied to try to make their point. Those who create disinformation are absolutely at fault for the way these lies shape society. Those who spread misinformation when they could easily fact check are complicit too. Are there times when facts don't matter? Or when a lie pales in comparison to the bigger picture, as is often suggested in Black Sails? Here's a journalism thought experiment. Say you're a journalist, and it's a few weeks before an election between an incumbent and a challenger. The incumbent is not a great option, but the challenger is showing serious danger signs that, if elected, could result in severe harm for many people, as well as concerns over loss of freedom of the press. They're still very popular with their supporters, and the election's really close. The two are neck and neck. As a journalist, you have received new information about the incumbent, a scandal that, while not on the same level of harm as the potential from the challenger, would easily tank the incumbent's campaign. Do you write an article and release this information right when you receive it? Or do you hold it back until after the election? I've seen arguments that the bigger picture and the risk of bigger harm take priority over sharing the information with the people. That maybe the people can't be trusted to not react emotionally in the moment and vote in a way that wouldn't be in the best interest of society as a whole or even themselves personally. And withholding the information would be protecting society from themselves. It sounds an awful lot like the justifications Flint gives in season 1, though that on its own doesn't inherently mean the argument is wrong. A bad person making a particular argument doesn't always mean the argument is wrong. We need to be able to look at an argument as it is, regardless of whoever said it, to determine its accuracy. This also holds true for arguments made by people we like, which I'll get into further a little later. I've also seen arguments that, regardless of the risk to freedom of the press after the election, if journalists sit on this information, there's no freedom of the press now. To me, the thought experiment shows just how much power journalists have in shaping society. Whether or not they should is another question, but the fact is they do. The same is true of historians, though perhaps to a less urgent degree. What should journalists and historians do with that power? What responsibilities do they have to society to make sure we get the correct information so that we can make informed decisions? I previously talked about the way lies get sold in the show, and there are a lot of parallels to the way stories get sold to us in the news today. I say stories rather than lies because they aren't always outright lies, and sometimes the true intent is to tell the full truth. But whether we realize it or not, we all have biases, and as Jack says, we are emotional beings after all. And those emotions come through in the way we speak and write and try to make our points. And they show how we feel about a topic, even when we try to be neutral. A video game designer I knew did a lot of research into things like emotion for a project, and he once made the point that there is no such thing as all logic, no emotion, because if we had no emotion, we wouldn't be able to make any decisions at all. We can say, well, logically, this is the obvious choice, but whether someone makes that choice or whether they even agree that that is the logical, obvious choice varies from person to person and is ultimately decided by how they feel about the choices. This way that our emotions affect us is related to the first way things are sold: oratory power. The way a journalist writes both shows their emotions and encourages certain emotions from their readers, which in turn encourages the way we think about a certain situation and how we respond to it with our actions. In terms of the show, is the logical, obvious choice to fight for the freedom of Nassau and the New World, or is it to restore peace to the settlers and merchants in the area? Both of those questions are written with positive words, freedom and peace, but both can be reframed in negative ways. Is the worse option aligning with the pirates who murder and pillage and cause destruction? Or is it aligning with the government that wants power and control, even if their citizens disagree with how that power should be wielded? We can see the way wording like this shows up today, whether in our modern day news reporting or in lower stakes video essays like this. It's important to look for the descriptive words. Even within this video I've written, I've caught myself trying to find the right adjectives or adverbs or synonymous but connotatively different nouns to properly convey my meaning, my feelings on the topic. When do I use the words or phrases not great, bad, horrible, or horrific? What about lie, misconception, misunderstanding? When and what do I subtly justify or condemn with my words? How do I describe the events of the story? Who do I sympathize with, the pirates or the British Empire? What unnecessary details are added in? Who is supposed to be the hero in this story? In Black Sails, we see Woodes Rogers cry over Eleanor's body when she gets killed in season 4. But by that point, we've developed such a hatred for him that it doesn't get us the same way as it does when we see that at just about the exact same time, Silver has been crying over what he believes is the loss of Maddie. They both love their partners, and both characters have been violent and frightening at times. But the show has presented this growth for Silver and positioned him as a complicated hero, while presenting Rogers as an irredeemable villain. Going back to season 1 Charles Vane is a little hard for me because despite the fact that by his end in season 3, he is an incredible character that many fans love, he allows for some truly horrible actions by his men back in season 1. But we go through such a process with the character that we feel sorrow for his death. Meanwhile, we cheer when Woodes Rogers gets removed as governor and sent to debtor's prison. I'm not saying that any fans of the show, myself included, are wrong to cheer for the pirates and against Woodes Rogers, but rather that things aren't super clear cut. All the characters are complicated and problematic in some way or another, but the show clearly presents its opinion that despite their complicated, violent natures, the pirates are the ones we are supposed to root for. The same is true for news media. If a police officer shoots a civilian, different news outlets, even when reporting on the exact same event, even with all the facts accurate, will use certain words, certain framing that lionizes or villainizes either person in the situation. Was the officer brave in the face of danger, or was the civilian an innocent victim? Most news agencies don't get that direct and obvious with their words. Some do, but those at least trying to stay or trying to appear neutral don't. But more subtle words might give it away. Do we get extra irrelevant details about either or both parties in the name of showing the whole picture that really make us either sympathize with or feel cold toward either of them? What does the article conveniently leave out in the name of being concise that is really just a hindrance to the story they want to sell? In Black Sails, there was the point where Abigail Ashe only had the part of the story her father told her, when reality was a bit more nuanced than that. Today, we see how even outside of the news media, those within political, religious, or social groups will tell those who agree with them that the other side is evil and made up of two-dimensional villains, sometimes eliminating all points of nuance in favor of establishing their particular perspective. The next way stories are sold to us that we saw in Black Sails is through rumor and exaggeration. This is more common with tabloid papers and less than reputable publications. There's also the issue of people sharing articles or commenting on them based entirely on the headline, which leads to news agencies using the most sensationalized headline they can, even if it carefully walks the line of libel by making something sound much more dramatic than it is, while not technically stating anything false. In the show, while the characters don't have a concern about being sued for libel, when Billy creates the legend of Long John Silver, he references the night that Silver menacingly declared he has a long memory, before labeling him as Long John Silver, rather than going with the more outlandish John the Giant who's 7 feet tall rumor, because he knows basing it in things that actually happened will make it take easier. But he also knows that the people of Nassau will take the legend he does create and run with it into their own rumors and stories, and he won't fight them on it. I imagine many tabloid writers have a similar attitude about the rumors that develop from their headlines. As the girl of Philadelphia says to Jack, the truth isn't nearly as interesting. And there are news publications that absolutely capitalize on that attitude. What's unfortunate is that while nuanced takes often aren't as sensationalized, they can be the spark of interesting, thoughtful conversations, if we're willing to have them. This is also where disinformation and misinformation via sound bites and memes comes in, and things have gotten even more complicated lately with generative AI, especially now that it's getting to be better quality. I remember years ago when I saw my first deepfake video. It was a goofy thing where someone took the opening to Full House, but every single character's face had been replaced with Ron Swanson's from Parks and Rec. Obviously fake, good for a laugh, until someone next to me pointed out, wow, this is going to get real messy when someone uses this to make it look like a politician said something they didn't say. Back in the early days of AI-generated images, it was pretty easy to look and go, hey, that person looks like something from the uncanny valley. But the tech has improved in quality very quickly, and now some videos have even fooled people that had previously congratulated themselves on being able to spot AI every time. And the problem's only going to get worse as technology gets better. Stories are also sold to us by playing on our desire for comfort. This can also be rephrased as giving us what we want. I mentioned previously about how misinformation goes around because it satisfies a specific emotional need, even if that emotional need isn't as clear-cut as happy, peaceful feeling. Sometimes we have an itch in our brain that gets scratched by the righteous outrage that news agencies are all too happy to provide for us, so long as we click on their article and give them ad revenue. I am not saying there are never reasons to be outraged. Certainly there are. But when something seems to be calculated to create outrage or comfort or schadenfreude or whatever, it's time to take a breath and fact check, and also look at the information and the way it's presented with a critical eye. As is pointed out at the end of the series, the stories we want to believe are the ones that survive. And lastly, stories are sold to us through the voice of authority. There are many types of logical fallacies that come out in arguments. You may have heard of some of them: straw man, slippery slope, things like that. Really, a lot of these ways that lies get sold are based in logical fallacies. I previously described the fallacy of appealing to emotion. Another logical fallacy is the fallacy of appealing to authority. Essentially, it's this respected or famous or smart person said it, therefore it must be true. This is a major part of the basis of those silly stories that became a meme in themselves, where a controversial claim is made via a story about someone initially anonymous, but at the end it's revealed, and that kid was Albert Einstein. Those stories are now viewed by most people to be about as true as stories that end with, and then everyone clapped, as in, not at all. Again, though, in major news articles, it's more subtle than that. A news article might say, this person said this somewhat controversial or outlandish thing. And then even if it's true that they did say that, if the person in question is someone that the leaning of the article or agency tends to align with, and then the article offers no further investigation or fact-checking into the statement they made, and just assume it must be true, watch out. This also gets sold to us by playing into the way we sort ourselves into groups, perhaps especially when it comes to political affiliation, but also other formal or informal organizations. If someone in my group said so, it must be true. So now that we know a few ways modern media might use these strategies, what do we do about it? First, stop yourself when you feel a strong emotional reaction. Look for the narrative style that might be influencing things. What kind of language are they using? What information are they including? What information may be conveniently missing? Ask yourself if the information being reported is even likely. Look at next steps. If this information is true, what would be the likely result? Is that result happening? What circumstances would it take for this information to be true? Do we know if those circumstances exist, or what is the likelihood that they do? This is a good checklist when an enticing conspiracy theory comes your way. Look for those appeals to emotion or authority or other logical fallacies. Am I supposed to feel outraged about this? Does this appeal to what I already believe to be true, maybe just a little too perfectly? Am I supposed to accept what this particular person said without questioning? It's important to note that even if a piece of news has one or more of these warning signs, that doesn't immediately mean that facts it presents aren't true. For example, something that makes you stop and say, is that even likely? That it's not super likely doesn't mean it didn't happen. So don't stop at this step. And then fact check, fact check, fact check. If something is throwing up any of these warning signals, and it'll most likely show at least something in terms of narrative style, since that's just part of how we communicate as humans, search the information back to its source. You can search the person or agency quoted to see if the quote is accurate and if it's the full quote, as well as analyzing the reliability of the source. Personally, I really like using Snopes or PolitiFact since they are thorough and have direct links to and explanations of all the sources they use to get to their conclusion, so you can follow their reasoning. And don't share anything until you are sure you can stand by it. It takes more effort, but it does contribute to a better educated, more reality-based world for everyone. So what do you think? When does truth matter and when doesn't it? What do you think about the journalism thought experiment? What would you do if you were in that situation? Do you have thoughts on the way fiction tells truth or the way facts can be used to tell lies? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For any historians who may be watching this, I did my best with the limited time and resources I had, and I try not to spread misinformation myself. But if I got something wrong, let me know. Or if you just want to info dump about the golden age of piracy or any other area of expertise, do that too. I always like learning new things. If you have a topic or story you love, let me know, and I'll add it to my list of potential things to read, things to watch, and things to talk about. Thanks for joining me in this discussion of pirates, lies, and critical literacy. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe, and you can check my channel description to find out when to expect the next video. And until next time, keep reading, keep watching, and keep digging deeper. Thanks for watching.
Forgive me. I will go on from time to time, but generally in the service of thoroughness, and always with the best of intentions. I appreciate your indulging me.